So we are at a point where your refrigerator can detect if you're running out of bread or egg. It can order it from your preferred retailer, and the stuff gets delivered to your home without you even thinking about it. If we were to kind of think through that very simple chain of events, the detection or the diagnostic happened automatically. The underlying or enabling transaction was already pre-authorized, and the outcome came to the consumer quite seamlessly again. Why can't we have that in healthcare? Well, things are a little bit more complex, not because we want them to be, some because of necessity. The core issue is, in healthcare, we cannot afford to make mistakes. There are no second takes. If you get brown bread instead of white, yeah, it's an annoyance, but life goes on. But if you get the wrong dosage of diabetes medication, it could be literally the end of the world for you, right? So of course, the technologies are more complex, the business processes are more complex, but the good news is, we are not that far away from that dream, and that's what we'll be discussing today is, where are we today? How quickly are we getting there? What is that art of the possible? And of course, what do all of us as players in the industry need to do to make it happen? So with that, let me start with you, Kevin. When we think about AI and digital, and the effect that it'll have, or it should have, on consumers in terms of ease of navigation of the healthcare system, in terms of better health outcomes, and of course, the cost of healthcare itself. Where are we right now in terms of what's around the corner, and what's that long-term vision?
Sure. Well, let me start by saying thank you, Nishant, for having us here. I'm very grateful to get to share stage with my good friend Rajeev. And I'd like to thank you guys for allowing Zyter True Care to be here. I represent 600 people who provide care for about 35 million people, and we do hundreds of millions of transactions every single year around care. And it's exactly as you described. It's super complex. So I can't take all responsibility for the complexity of healthcare, but we're trying to improve it as well. Now, I think, as an individual consumer, that wearables and AI offer actually tremendous avenues towards a better tomorrow. How many people, by show of hands, are wearing an iWatch right now, or at least have an iWatch, or some ilk? Exactly. So, I've been gamified by my watch. I have looked at my watch at 9 o'clock at night after work and realized I was that close to completing my rings, so I did a bunch of jumping jacks in my work clothes so that I could complete my rings. Definitely Apple gamified my own health, and it's to my own benefit. Now, the key is to structure that information and that context aligned with the opportunity for intervention. Context is everything. Intervening at the right time, at the right place, through the right channel is really the key, and that's what makes healthcare so complex. All of us are healthcare consumers, but unlike most other avenues that we're consumers on, we often don't pay any or all of the full freight for the cost that we incur. So our employer, our previous speaker from IBM, that's hundreds of thousands of individuals who are employed and provided benefits for. Your former employer, same thing. So we are consumers of a product that we're not fully paying for nor fully realizing. So that also lends to some difficulty in creating that right time, right channel, and in context. Rajeev, what do you think?
Well, I think Nishant, you used the retail example of a refrigerator that's reordering, eggs or your bread. But let's take a step back, and if you were to go to Best Buy and buy that fridge, you'd probably walk home with it the same day, or it'll get delivered to you in a day or two. And you know exactly what you paid for it and what you're getting out of it. Now imagine the same transaction were to be sort of processed in a healthcare context. First up, they'll probably ask you, where are you going to put this fridge, what kind of things you would stock in it, whether you actually need it or not. And then you'd probably go home with it without knowing how much it actually costs. And then the manufacturer of the fridge, let's say it's Samsung, and you bought it from Best Buy, would get together and talk about, well, what should this cost? And eventually figure out okay, the consumer should pay $10 for their copay, and then this is what the insurer should pay, Samsung, and then you settle the transaction some weeks and months later. That's typically the state of healthcare.
And Venmo would let you pay for it.
Exactly. So that's the state of transactions in healthcare. So I think, back to your question, I think we can use AI and all of our data to make that process much more simple, which is what the company that I'm joining as CEO, Lyric Health, is going to be focused on doing. But more importantly, I think there's also a huge opportunity to use data and AI and machine learning and large language models that are quite the viral fad these days to improve the quality of care, improve the equity of care, and make healthcare much more proactive and predictive versus just reacting to our symptoms and treating those symptoms.
So if you were to break that problem down, right, starting with the detection or diagnostics, of course, the dream is that our watch will be able to detect and preempt stuff that we might be heading into. It will be able to then inform our healthcare provider and prompt a series of events from there. Just from a care perspective, keeping aside the payment and the regulation aside for a moment, where is the technology, state of technology with that? Are we there? Are we in the process of kind of putting the bits together, or is that still 5 years away from us?
So this is a space near and dear to our heart. At Zyter TrueCare, we actually send devices to you and your parents' homes. So people are reliant on their life and their care based on devices that we are fulfilling for our health plan and provider customers. I can say this, the technology is there, and it has been for some time. It's not a matter of does the iWatch read the EKG, it's does the person who need to have their EKG read have an iWatch. So it's really more of a logistical issue. The discoordination between the person who has a necessity and the ability to serve that, I think, is the fundamental problem. Once you have the data, intervening through prompts and artificial intelligence and machine learning and neural network language models is inevitable. The more people who have access to a remote device, whether it's something as simple as did I get my rings completed today, to hospitalization in the home, all or almost all care will be in some way facilitated, part or parcel, in the home. The question then becomes the logistics. How do we, where healthcare is a business, get the customer who needs to have that in-home care to get the device, to have it set up, to be reading that information so we can respond? Technology, great. The ability to use AI on that data, great. The logistical problem, not so much.
Well, I think there's also probably the fragmentation problem, Kevin, which is, I think if you look at the narrow definition of wearables and AI, and I think you could say, yeah, I mean, of course, the watch does quite a few things, the Whoop and other sensors do quite a few things, and if you move to clinical grade sensors like a Dexcom or Freestyle Libre devices, they do a pretty good job of glucose monitoring and reading, and pacemakers have been around for decades. So I think for specific issues, there's some really good quality technology and there's good quality processes wrapped around it to respond to that. I think what it's going to take 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer, is putting it all together. Mm-hmm. Imagine all the stuff that we need. We need genetic tests to figure out like what genes are really root causes of all our health issues. We need to put that together with behavioral health and social sort of factors in health. We need to put together socioeconomic data and other things that work into it. Of course, do all the wearables to monitor one's health. And that's got to go somewhere. Where does it go? Today, everything is a silo. If you have a heart problem, you see a cardiologist. If you have internal medicine problems, you see that department. Medicine is organized by departments, not by the person. Whereas the tech is addressing the person. Mm-hmm. How do we bring the change so that the departments of medicine and how it's sort of been ingrained in our system of science and society needs to flip to where we're seeing the whole person and treating that whole person?
In fact, that is what AI is actually there for, to
Right.
recognize patterns of large volumes of data that would otherwise not be done. There are plenty of experts in the cardiac care department who have lived long enough and served long enough and done their 10,000 hours, and they can say with great assurance, this is the treatment. However, they don't actually have the full picture of the individual.
That's right.
Because they haven't talked to their PCP or their behavioral health specialist. They don't understand their social determinants. And it's that data combined together with the power of AI, recognizing the patterns that will enable us to have what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think it's a T model, right? So the horizontal would be AI, and then the vertical would be human knowledge that has seen these cases, trained in these fields, and is able to provide that expert advice that only they can. But the broadest connecting the dots has to happen through AI and technologies like that.
I agree.
So sounds like the technology exists. Now, how reliable or acceptable is that technology right now? Because yes, you can play the command and control using AI, but would the medical fraternity even accept that? And how production ready is it? Like we said earlier, there aren't any retakes in healthcare. So where are we with that?
I'm of two minds of this. So what Frank said earlier really hit me very clearly. We were all caught off guard by AI. I was at a leadership offsite early this year. Elise Sikora, our chief revenue officer, who's in the back, along with Jason Cole, our chief operating officer, and she goes, hey, have you seen this chat GPT thing? And I'm like, what? So she goes, check this out. We start using it, and all of a sudden the leadership offsite completely turned to hell. Like for a good hour, we got pulled into the weeds of what is chat GPT. And then just for kicks, Jason said, well, give me a care plan for somebody with diabetes. What was produced was not far from what I would consider clinically relevant and accurate. Now, we're not in a place where any doctor is going to come up and say that is, nor would I want to represent my own risk against something like that. So you definitely have the technology outpacing our ability to fundamentally use it. But at the same time, I read this morning that CMS is strongly considering doing reimbursements for virtual VR therapies. So I picture my mom with her VR device at the house and the madness that ensues from that. And so it simultaneously, we are experimenting in different ways. We are outpacing our ability to serve, given the technology we have, and we've got to figure out a way for the financial part of it to catch up. That's the other part that Rajeev so adequately described earlier. Healthcare is a business, whether we like it or not, and if you don't, someone's got to pay for it, so you have to make sure the financing shows up with the clinical, with the technology at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's working well in certain areas. So for instance, while I was at my previous company at Elevance Health, we'd rolled out an AI symptom triage capability that was available via the app and our portals. And the first thing you did was you put in your symptoms, and then this triage capability would compare others that were in our database that had similar symptoms, and they would sort of narrow it down into 50 other people had the following symptoms, and this was kind of what they experienced as a result of that. So for that type of pattern recognition, AI is working extremely well. And it discovers many things that ordinarily doctors wouldn't. And we've got numerous anecdotes of how someone's had this rare disease and they went to a PCP and they couldn't quite figure it out. But the AI could absolutely figure that out quite readily. And it's being used by primary care practitioners in the virtual setting as to augment their ability to ultimately treat and make recommendations on what to do next. Well, there are other cases like cancer and those more complex diseases where there's still some ways to go. I think AI does a good job with research, providing sort of let's just say productivity aids to the oncologists, but not quite there yet to say this is how something ought to be treated, because I think they're unique and there's kind of small data problems as well as big data problems, and you got to look at it all together to say where we are.
I'm encouraged by radiology. It freaks me out that someone's going to make a deep fake of either you and I saying something that we didn't say. So I don't like the generalization of AI against imagery, but in the medical term, I'm actually quite excited about the ability for AI, which is proven in many cases to be able to spot things that radiologists would not be able to otherwise.
Yeah. You brought up a good angle, Kevin, which is around security and maybe ethical considerations as well, with AI-powered devices, bots, sharing data, extracting data from our wearables and so on, and transmitting. Do we have the frameworks right now to be able to safeguard that, to be able to safely interoperate between the various constituents of health, payers, providers, pharma, and so on?
I don't think that we do, which is concerning. But our COO suggested that we should ourselves become more adequately informed about generative AI before we begin to unleash it on the world. And so his principles are what our company follows. First, how can we use it to become more productive? I've got 400 developers, and we're evaluating, can we use it to help them begin a code snippet? Not write the code for them, but begin a code snippet. I've got marketers, and Copy AI does a great job of beginning a blog post or a tweet. So we first look within to see how can we change our own operations. And I am, just like any other leader in this organization, I run a business and I need to make it as productive as I possibly can. So we're evaluating generative AI against our own internal use cases. Then we look at it, how can we make it productive and easier for our customers? So the idea that open AI against the internet is still unnerving in the sense that I might ask it for care advice and I don't know what its sources are. However, if I can aim that towards my own sources, I've got hundreds of millions of transactions that I have done within my own ecosystem that is highly secure and HIPAA compliant. And if I can aim it within that context, I can begin to recognize patterns and begin to make it easier for a care manager to create an outbound message quickly for an individual with similar symptoms. And if we can pass hurdle 1, look within, hurdle 2, how can we control it and make it more useful, then eventually we'll get to hurdle 3, which will be how can we use this to really evolve beyond with our product sets. And so that's the pace that we're taking as Zyter TrueCare.
So as you said, the context is very critical for AI to really give accurate results. Now, how much of a stratification of patient demographics do we need to do? Like, how narrow a band does that need to be?
I will defer to the value-based care expert who sits next to me. I'm an honor to be on stage with you on this subject.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, I think there's a broader question there, right? I think which is, of all the innovations that you're hearing about today and what you'll probably see later on this week, the question is, how does that get funded? And I think, so value-based care offers a means to that end. And Kevin, your company, I think, as having a platform for value-based care, I think is really well positioned to take on this question, right? So if you look at the history of all the innovations that have happened in medtech, whether it's a new MRI machine or it's wearables or what have you, that's got to get funded somewhere in our system of healthcare. And right now we've been at odds against this, which is, the financing of care is at odds with the innovation of care.
That's right.
Value-based care, to me, basically says, all right, let's kind of not fight against one another, but use innovation as a means to better, improving quality of care, making care more equitable and more accessible, and leave it in the hands of providers to make decisions on what tech to apply where in order to improve health outcomes. So in doing that, to your question, the population, of course, has to be risk stratified. We know that most of our costs happen, with our population 76 and over. And they're the population that are least likely to wear, wearable or, what have you. We were at one of our previous employers' clinics a few weeks ago, and we were doing a site visit, and one of the consumers came in, and I asked her the question, so what smartphone apps do you use on your phone? And then she picks up her phone and shows me
She flipped it open?
Well, actually it was a phone, or a smartphone, but she showed me the 5 numbers that she calls. It's like, app 1 was the clinic, hotline, the second one to a nurse. So I think there's a wide range of sort of adaptability and adoption of these technologies. And we have to, I think, understand that the riskiest and the least healthy population sometimes is the least likely to use wearables or any smartphone devices for that matter. But caregivers and people that are around them might. And so how do we make it happen so that we can marry the two, sort of enable the caregivers to have the tech to care for that population, and stratify the risks so that from a value-based care perspective, we can manage the population better.
We've seen some interesting precursors to this. Humana, I remember when, they were fundamentally one of the leaders in creating wellness programs and then gamifying those and rewarding people for those. And they gave all of their employees iWatches, and they began to do that out through their constituents, their membership as well. And I know the people that ran the program, they fundamentally did see an uptick in activation, participation, and health. So that worked. Now, another area I saw Steve Forbes speak a few years ago, and one of the fundamental things that struck me about his presentation was that, exactly as you said, medtech is where the advancements have come forward, but they've come forward rapidly in elective areas, eye surgeries, right? The rapid acceleration of phenomenal technology from when I originally did my radio keratotomy to what happens now and the high recovery rates and the high quality rates. And I think I paid $10,000 and they're like $895 now. That would be a fundamental model that we'd want to see repeated. So we proved that we can do it. However, that's not where the cost of care is. That's not where the issues lie. It's not that people who could pay for radiokeratotomy need to be fixed. It's that my mom, who's 80 and multi-chronic, that's who's driving up the cost of healthcare. And so how do we, as you said, advance it to facilitate AI, wearable care in that context of that patient population that's actually driving the costs?
And then if you were to kind of think about it from both the angles, right? Of course, value-based care, that's changing a lot of fundamental business processes on the payer and provider side. And then there is the technology-led disruption, which is coming through through wearables, through AI, through how we store and use data, how we share data. How disruptive is all of this to the traditional business processes of, let's say, a payer or provider or even integrated systems? And where are we with kind of changing some of those? Because it's one thing to have the technology available, it's one thing to have some frameworks available to refer to, but bringing about that change is much more painful. What are you seeing, Rajeev?
Yeah, I think, for as far as I've known, and Kevin, you may have a point of view on this, value-based care has been 2 years away from being fully adopted at scale.
It's like a lot of IT projects.
Exactly.
They're 2 years away from go live. Exactly.
So I think this answer may be somewhat similar, is that I think the perception is, there's so much disruption that's happening that's all around us. Why isn't it, more, sort of keenly felt and more felt at scale in healthcare? And again, part of it is, I think, healthcare is a highly regulated industry, and the fund flows are very complex. And we have to be able to connect fund flows in healthcare to disruption to be able to truly scale something. Otherwise, it'll be interesting in a market or two or a segment or two, but it won't be across the country. So as to how far out we are from all of that, I think, in my opinion, we're at least 5 years away in being able to do one thing really well, which is understand what the consumer needs in terms of care, have the consumer understand all the options, both from a cost perspective, quality, transparency, have the doctors in the hospital be certain that in administering that care, it's not only fixing that one symptom that they're seeing, but the holistic whole health of that person, whether it's behavioral, social, and other factors. And then the payers of that, whether it's government or insurers, understand the complete context of what's happening so that we can all be in sync, the consumer, the provider, and the payer, as to what's happening and why it's happening and what the outcomes are going to be. I think, interestingly, the underpinnings of creating that kind of an infrastructure already exist. We need things like blockchain, we need sort of interoperability of data, we need sort of payment policies like value-based care and outcomes-based care. We need CMS to incent quality and innovation, which they are. But all these things need to converge as sort of one giant trend in order for this to come together at scale. So, I expect that that's at least 5 years out.
I fundamentally agree, and I think the one add I would do to what is the correct and brilliant answer is that it comes down to how you coordinate all of this work that you're doing, all these transactions against a pool of risk. So here's my anecdote. Imagine that you were approached by the city of Huntington Beach, California, and they said, we will give you a capitated rate, a fixed rate, to fix every car in Huntington Beach. And I'll give you like a lot of money to do this. You would probably say, I don't know that that's really a good idea because we've got Porsches and Pintos, and we've got all these different models, and we've got e-cars, and we've got gas cars. That's a lot of risk to take on. There's a lot of variance in having to be the mechanic for something that broad and that disparate. Now, what if I came back and I said, how about we make you the mechanic for all Porsches? My preference, we'll go Mercedes. For all Mercedes over the last 10 years. That would be better, because you'd be working with a more homogeneous setting. Now, what if I said only E-Class is made over the past 5 years? Then you'd really be like, okay, I can do that. And I can do that at a capped rate, because I believe I can manage under the cost of that. Because I can staff people who know that model, or those series of models really well, that understand that technology, they understand how to apply it, and they can do it with consistency, rigorous, consistent, and high quality. So if we do everything else, all things being equal, we create the technology, CMS gives the regulations, we drive forward with an eye towards AI, but we don't create areas where providers can handle risk, where the mechanics of healthcare, the provider, can say, I can treat this population of patients who are similar, then we're still gonna struggle. And this goes back to your point that we wanna get it out of the department into something that is more recognizable. And that, I would think, is probably one of the last areas of evolution that healthcare still needs to see.
Coming to the cost of care, right? As we talk about new technologies, new business processes, new interoperability models, changes, fundamental changes to the industry, how do we take cost out of something that's already very complex? Now, we did also talk about context and the need to kind of stratify populations. It almost seems like we are going to create several versions of the process, several versions of the technology, which stacks up the cost. Where are we going to get the efficiencies from? And I can hazard an answer, but I want to hear it from the two experts here.
I think, so one area, Nishant, is, we've all heard the cliche that, there's $1 trillion of waste, like in the system. And I think it's, maybe an estimate, but it's close enough. And where the waste is in all of the redundant administrative processes between payers, providers, and the government on what could be much more automated and streamlined. So the resistance to change comes from when you're removing the cheese or you're optimizing or making something more efficient, and someone loses in the process. This $1 trillion, incidentally, no one loses. It's just that redundant cost exists on the provider side, on revenue cycle management. There's payment integrity and program integrity processes on the payer side that safeguard against it. So it's like an arms race that's in motion, trying to fight off of each other, with neither side benefiting from that waste. Of course, in the process, consumers aren't getting the care that they could be getting because of that $1 trillion. We still have a lot of equity issues in healthcare, access to care issues in healthcare that could be addressed. And then government policy, while well-intended, ultimately isn't addressing the very core of making healthcare more accessible, more equitable, and making it more streamlined. Although they're trying to do it with all the regulations around interoperability, all the regulations around quality of care and all that. So I think I'd say if you were to start with making healthcare and cost of care sort of more affordable, automating the waste out of the system is a good place to start. And the tech is there to be applied at scale to make it happen. Now, what it requires is the commitment of the parties to act in sync to be able to take this on, which is easier said than done. And then beyond that, I think the reason that in part why things are expensive as they are in healthcare is that no two parties agree to the source of truth. So if I have an MRI from a provider A and I go to my doc and say, hey, I've got this MRI, very likely they'll say, yeah, well, that's their MRI, I need to do my own. And even something as simple as that is costing every consumer and the healthcare system some money. So I think we have to promote the idea that a source of truth, when established, should be made available to the rest of the system so we can sort of lower the cost, to the collective system.
And there have been some moves in that direction. There have been alliances coming together to kind of start sharing data and try to become more interoperable. Some of the issues that you just brought about have existed and are known issues. Do you think with this oncoming push to value-based care, it systemically provides some incentive to tide over those issues? Or are they going to continue or could continue if you're not careful?
Well, I think, using Kevin's analogy of the cars and the mechanics, if the system was designed to have the mechanics see as many cars as they can in an hour to make money on it, well, they have no incentive to keep the cars on the road and keep it out of the shop, right? I mean, they're fixing the issue and getting to the next car. I think value-based care is ultimately asking the question, how can you longitudinally look at a patient's health outcome and keep them healthy and be incented on that common thing across time so that everyone benefits from it? Well, the issue is it could be done, in Medicare. I think it could be done for a portion of the population. But for an average, let's say, three of us likely are, part of some employer-funded, benefit plan in the commercial space, where the churn is about 18 to 24 months. So employers tend to change, their insurance companies every 18 to 24 months, in which case an ROI on a value-based program like diabetes, as you know, Kevin, is something like 5 years. So how do you reconcile that, right? So even if we wanted to do it commercial, most insurers can't because the churn rate in commercial. So I think there's some challenges still to address in terms of how we do it. I think it's doable with a combination of regulatory changes, partnerships that are creative, and applying tech in a way that benefits us. But we're not quite there yet.
And I'll add to that, I think the necessity for service providers, keeping in theme of what we're talking about today, service providers need to understand that they've got to bear risk as well. So let's take that same mechanic scenario. Are the wrench makers willing to get paid by the turn of the wrench? Right. Or are they still looking to sell the wrench or the entire wrench set? And you can't ask the mechanic to take risk if the wrench provider is not willing to take risk as well. So we're serious about tying our success to our customer success in a value-based world. So that does require data because you want to make sure you said, you did use my wrench and you did turn it 3/4 and that did add value to what you just did. So attribution's key. But if you're not willing to have that conversation, if you're a software provider and your question is how many seats are you going to buy? How many wrenches are you going to buy? You're probably not long for the value-based care world.
So ultimately make all the constituents responsible for the ultimate outcome, which is to keep people healthy, to lower the number of incidents and intensity of incidents, and therefore the cost.